Welcome to Lyric Lab Poetry. My name is Martin Jago, and in this video we are exploring one poetry prompt with the help of a title, a part of which I'm going to give you and you're going to complete, and then you're going to use that title as a springboard into the creative process. And this video is inspired by a group of poems I've been reading recently. They don't exist as a group, but they all start with the same few words, and those words are self-portrait as ... self-portrait as something. This is a fascinating concept. It's not simply self-portrait 2025. It's self-portrait through another thing that's external to the speaker of the poem, and that's a really interesting idea. And I want to just explore 4 poems. I'll put links to them in the description below, and please do check those out on the Poetry Foundation website. The first one is a poem by Geffrey called Self-Portrait as a Dead Black Boy. It is an incredibly powerful and moving poem, and the poem is in 5 parts. There are 5 different sections which are numbered, and within each of those sections there are a couple of stanzas and a couplet, or a couple of stanzas and a single line. So it's not a short poem, but it's not really a very long poem either. And at each part of the poem, the speaker introduces us to a younger version of themselves. At the beginning of the poem, they are 13. Later, they are 28 years old. Then they're in their 30s with a child of their own. And just to start at the beginning, the first section, the speaker talks about when they were 13 years old, and talks about playing outside, talks about playing at the back of the house between the houses and where the railroad track is, and having a pellet gun and shooting anything that moved in the bushes. And the speaker talks about if anyone had asked them at that age, or had come across that kid and said, "Hey kid, what have you got there in your hand?" Then innocently the kid would have turned around and shown the person. It's at this point in the poem that the poet intersects that speaker's life with the death, with the shooting, the killing of Tamir Rice, and it is visceral. It's just a sort of terribly engaging moment that's deeply affecting in the poem. And it's from that point, really, if you haven't guessed already, exactly what the poet is doing as he draws these parallel lines between the speaker's lived experience and the deaths of these young black boys and men. He talks about Tamir Rice, and then talks about Jordan Davis, and then on to Philando Castile, and finally Eric Garner. And at each juncture, just before the mention of the name of these boys and the number of times, the X number of times they were shot, the poet situates the speaker. It brings to mind that old sort of cliched truism of walking while black. The speaker's just going about their business, and it's this impossible weight of institutional racism and violence that is just always there, apparent. It's an incredibly powerful poem, and you can see how the speaker and the poet, who is black, is drawing these parallel lines. You can see how self-portrait as a dead black boy exists terrifyingly in the consciousness of the speaker and the reality in the lived lives, in the lived experience of many people who happen to be people of color in this country today. The next poem I want to talk about is very different, but it also begins with the words self-portrait as. This poem stopped me in my tracks for a different reason. The title immediately took me by surprise. Self-portrait as Masturbator is a title that is going to stop you in your tracks. And I have to tell you, I felt sort of unsettled and uncomfortable. But when I read the poem, I found that I was in a different kind of poem to the one I had expected. And actually, this is a poem by Yuxi, and it is incredibly sensual and honest and open. When we get to the end, when we arrive at the end of the poem, we arrive as the speaker arrives, and there's some italicized lines there with the words, "I've arrived I've arrived. And I guess we can imagine what that means, the climactic moment of the poem and the experience. We're invited into the experience in a way that doesn't feel, to me, at all unsettling or dirty, in the way that when I read the title, I thought, oh, this was going to be some kind of visceral in a different kind of way. But it's actually a very sensual poem, and I really enjoyed it. It's much shorter than the first poem I mentioned, but moving on to the next poem. The next poem is by Elizabeth Theriot. I don't know whether I pronounced that correctly. Please do put me right if I've mispronounced that. It's called Self-Portrait as a Self-Care Mantra. So now we're moving away from the things that someone is, or the experience, as in the first poem, Self-Portrait as a Dead Black Boy, not another person, but through a mantra. And in this poem, we encounter a speaker whose life feels like it's on hold, or exists via a certain set of things they have to do or comply with simply in order to continue living. In other words, the speaker is managing what feels like, when you read the poem, a chronic medical issue or condition. And there's a wonderful line in there when the speaker says that I'm not sad about being alive, but about living. As if the weight of living is its containment, in that the living is not freedom to live without having to manage this condition. Very powerful poem. The last one I want to talk about briefly is a poem by A. He Lee. It is a poem called Self-Portrait as Daily Sustenance. So through the very act of eating, this is a poem that, self-portrait as this thing that we all do to live on a daily basis. And again, there are sections in this poem, and in each section we encounter the speaker at a different stage in their life. It may be sharing food or cooking food for friends. It may be as a child playing, having a school friend come home and opening the fridge door. It could be following an argument with a sibling and then taking an apple, which is symbolic in a different cultural way than depending on your sort of heritage and background. But the symbolism in this poem relates to the speaker's cultural identity as a Korean American. Again, a very effective, very clever, but very engaging poem that uses this idea of food and daily sustenance as a way of talking about the self. So I want you to, first of all, just go and read those 4 poems and take your time. Go to the Poetry Foundation website. I'll put links in the description below the video. And read through each of the poems and then decide which one resonates with you most strongly. And then I want you to play around with a few alternate titles. If you took the titles that you have from these 4 and you were to riff on those, maybe with the second one, Self-Portrait as Masturbator, think about all the things that you are. Maybe write down a long list of the things you are professionally, publicly, privately, maybe the things that you are, maybe through your habits or your predilections, proclivities, self-portrait as a chain smoker. The title of that poem makes me laugh as well, because in England we have a word which is a derogatory word for someone that's a bit of an asshole, we might say, in the United States. And that is, the expression means to masturbate. So self-portrait as a wanker, as an asshole. I guess the American equivalents might be the word jerk, a bit of a jerk, but the word wanker is a bit stronger. It's somewhere in the middle ground. Probably not a word that you would repeat in front of your grandmother, if that is the ultimate sort of litmus test of whether it counts as a true swear word or not. So it's in the higher level, the category, the A category, with the F word and the C bomb. So maybe think about a list of things that you are, and that could be relating to your professional, private, or public, or habitual self. That's a really good way in. But I also want you to think about what those last 2 poems are doing with the title, not as a person, dead or alive, but as a thing. One was a mantra, and one is through the act of eating. So maybe self-portrait as a thing that you do. or an experience or an object, self-portrait as a glass of water, which is definitely half full. So there you are. I want you to read the 4 poems, start riffing on a title for your poem, and maybe you can play around with a few alternate titles until you settle on one which really you find you're able to mine in terms of the material it gives you when you dive in. Please share your results or your work in progress or comments in the description below. I'd be very interested to hear how you get on. I actually have written my own self-portrait as poem, which was inspired by these poems I found on the Poetry Foundation website, and the concept is a really fascinating one, so have fun with it. Thank you for watching, and as always, please do click on the like button and the subscribe button if you haven't already done that, and I'll be back very soon with more poetry content.